Well, hello, everybody. This is Tim Green with Rattle Magazine. Welcome to Rattlecast number 174. So glad you could join me. John Brehm is our main guest. He'll be here in about 10 minutes. But before we begin, I should say that Rattle's a publication of the Rattle Foundation, a 501c3 nonprofit working to promote the practice of poetry. We've been in continuous publication since 1995 and are unaffiliated with any other organization. We just do this because we love poetry, and I know you do too, so please do click the like button, share, make sure you're subscribed on Facebook. Like ring the bell, or not ring the bell, click the hearts and stuff, because hearts are way better than likes. Laughs are really good too. They like a lot of emotive responses rather than just liking things. So click stuff, share stuff, it's all good. You can help spread poetry everywhere, which is what we're always trying to do with Rattle, and the Rattlecast especially. So to begin, neither the Poets Respond poets are able to make it today. They both have very good reasons. But yesterday's poet was right here. You recognized her from, we published her once before in Rattle itself, and she was in Poets Respond back in the spring talking about the war on Ukraine, where she's from. And this is Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach with another poem, a follow-up on the war in Ukraine, what's going on right now. And I'll tell you what she writes right here. Julia says, the missiles continue to fall in Ukraine. Millions lose power and heat and even water. It is well below freezing all across the country. On Christmas Eve, when many families in the U.S. and around the world gather around a tree decorated by hundreds of lights at my birthplace, Ukraine, this day will mark 10 months of brutal full-scale war. It is too easy to grow used to the barrage of terrible news, too easy to forget that during this time of celebration, suffering continues. If you are able, consider contributing to an aid organization that helps those who are in Ukraine and refugees trying to flee. I recommend Ukraine Trust Chain as an all-volunteer nonprofit run by Ukrainian immigrants in the U.S. They work with local volunteers on the ground, going directly into areas hard to reach by larger international organizations. Trust Chain provides urgent food, medical supplies, and transportation to safer regions. That is Julia Dasbach's note. And then here's Julia reading the poem.
The Ukrainian flag stares through the balsam fir from Larry's trees. Just take it, he said, and I doubted generosity. Are you sure? Still $30 short. I've learned nothing is free in this country. His white mustache curled to a smile. I'm Larry, and this is the South, and these are my trees. How easy to claim what soil gives, to own trees and bodies, to give them away to strangers so my children can hang the shatterproof ornaments and ask for more light, while in Ukraine the bulbs won't spark, the heat won't radiate, the soil will stay snow-covered, and theirs, and in my house strings and strings of electric rainbow dazzle trail the evergreen and walls and wind my children's small limbs. Here in Arkansas, it's barely cold enough to light a fire, but we can and do with oak and crabapple. We home its added glow, so everything smells of invited smoke and pine, not invaded smoking sky, where the windows flicker with candlelight and shellings. And tomorrow I will bake gingerbread and fry latkes and light the candles forbidden in my Soviet childhood. Tomorrow I will pray to a God I don't believe in for more miracle. Tomorrow I will still have been born from darkness and wick, and tonight when I lift my daughter to place the silver star on the highest branch, and my American mother-in-law takes a photo, the only light will be the yellow, blue horizon of the flag frozen in the window behind us.
Yeah, beautiful poem, especially that ending. Once again, that was on Julia Kolchinsky Dasbach with the Ukrainian flag stares through the balsam fir from Larry's trees. That was yesterday's poem on Poets Respond. And now we have another poem tomorrow. This is a Ghazal of Mangoes. And it's by Bhavika Sicka, who is an Indian poet, so can't be here because it's like 6 a.m. in India right now. But it's a beautiful ghazal. The story that Bhavika is responding to is this in Karnataka. Here's the screen view. In Karnataka, the recent cyclone-induced rainfall resulted in fungal disease to mango crops, shattering the dreams of farmers who were hoping for a good harvest this year. In other news, the headmaster of a school in Mandya, Karnataka, was taken into custody for sexually exploiting his female students. So here is Bhavika's poem, a ghazal. And let me, the screen is too big. Hang on a second. Shrink this down. That's better. I'm a ghazal of mangoes. Summertime, our kitchen counters spill with mangoes. Him sugar, hapis, chauza, langra, and other mangoes. Ma and I, we ride on a rickshaw to Gariat Bazaar, where vendors sell crates full of plums, lychees, and mangoes. Ma squeezes the fruits tenderly to learn if they are plump. Her sari is block-printed with paisleys, upturned mangoes. Later, I slip into my boyfriend's flat. In his drawing room hangs a silk painting, Nur Jahan in an orchard of mangoes. He says he wants to end things, and my throat tightens like I've swallowed hard, fibrous pits of ripe mangoes. In Kayasapura, a farmer shields his eyes, surveys his trees. He grows badami, Karnataka's prized Alfonso mangoes. This year, the rain from the cyclone has ruined his yield. His hopes shrivel up and drop off like blighted mangoes. One Sunday, after math class, my tutor offers me tea, cha and sondesh, crumbled cheese and pureed mangoes. He asks me to wait after the other pupils leave. He offers me a long hug, says my breasts are firm like mangoes. Bhavi, do you remember what Ma said? A woman gives up a part of herself if she chooses to go where a man goes. And that is a ghazal for tomorrow's poem of the day. And once again, that is by Bhavika Sicka, a ghazal of mangoes. And that is going to be tomorrow's poem. So hope you enjoyed that. Still trying to get some audio from Bhavika too. Hopefully we'll get that tonight. And in the meantime, we're going to take a quick break and go to our main guest. John Brehm is here. We'll be there just a moment, so sit tight, hang right where you are, and I will be right back. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. Like I said, today's guest is John Brehm. John Brehm was born and raised in Lincoln, Nebraska, and educated at the University of Nebraska and Cornell University. He's the author of 3 full-length books of poetry: Sea of Faith, Help is on the Way, and No Day at the Beach, which is what we'll be focusing on today. All from the University of Wisconsin Press. Also a chapbook, The Way Water Moves, from Flume Press. His collection of essays, The Dharma of Poetry, was recently released by Wisdom Publications. We'll be talking about that a lot today, too. As a companion to his acclaimed anthology, The Poetry of Impermanence, Mindfulness, and Joy, also from Wisdom Publications. John teaches for Mountain Writers Series in Portland, Oregon, and for the Lighthouse Writers Workshop in Denver, Colorado. He offers a monthly poetry as spiritual practice gathering with his wife, Alice Boyd, leads mindfulness retreats that incorporate Feldenkrais Awareness Through Movement lessons, guided meditation, and mindful poetry discussions. He lives in Portland, Oregon, and he can tell us how to pronounce Feldenkrais. But here is John Brehm. Thanks so much for joining us, John. It's great to have you.
Thanks, Tim. It's great to be here. Yeah, and you got it right, pretty much.
Well, I worked through it. It took a while, but
yeah.
So do you want to start out by reading a poem so we can get the feel of your work?
Yeah, I thought I'd begin with the first poem in the book, and it's called Back Then.
Great.
Everything was better back then. Even my nostalgia was better, more piercing, more true. I miss missing things that much, but not as much as I missed missing things back then. Even my anxieties about the future, which have indeed come to pass, were more vivid back then, more real. Reality itself seemed more real back then. This clanking stage play only a fool could find convincing. I fell for it all, and it killed me again and again. Ghosts of myself wander the cities I've lived in, thinking of other cities, imagining me here, imagining them. We nod to each other across the years, the way the last line of a poem will sometimes look back, wistfully, at the first.
Yeah, and that was Back Then, the first poem in No Day at the Beach, John Brehm's newest book. And John, I was really fascinated to see, I don't know much about any of the poets. Like, I don't like participate much in the poetry community, actually. And, we just publish poems, and that's all I know. So I was really interested to see when I read your bio and started looking at your work, that you have so much work in Buddhism and spirituality through poetry. Can you start out just talking a little bit about that? Because I think that's going to be the focus. It's the topic of the book, too, No Day at the Beach. Can you talk about what the Dharma of Poetry is, and maybe what Dharma is, and just give an introduction to what you're talking about here for everybody?
Yeah, well, those are all big questions that require subtle and complicated answers. I'm not sure I can provide, but yeah. So I've been, meditating for 20 years and kind of a student of the Dharma for a long time. And in the last 5 or 10 years, my spiritual practice, my Buddhist practice, and my writing practice have started to converge or become more integrated. And the spiritual dimension of poetry is what I find most compelling. So in the Dharma of Poetry, the first sentence of that book of essays is, "This is a book about poetry as a source of wisdom." And that seems to me not the only thing that one turns to poetry for, but for me, that's really foreground now. Like I turn to poems for what they can show me about how to live my life, about how to wake up, about how to remember my true nature. And I'm working on a new anthology now, and I'm writing some essays, and I'm thinking about poems as vehicles to help us remember who we really are at the most fundamental level, beneath cultural and familial conditioning, the identities that we assume or have foisted upon us, that there's a kind of untainted essence underneath that. And that, it seems to me, is what poems speak to most profoundly. So that's what I'm interested in. Yeah. And the Dharma, the Dharma can refer to specifically the Buddhist teachings, but it can refer more broadly to the truth of things, the way things are. And so that's that's how I think of the Dharma of poetry, poems that show us the truth of things, the truth of who we are, the truth of life, of our interconnectedness with all of life. So.
And how did you come to view it that way, to view poetry that way? Did the poems come first, and then you realized, did you find sort of Buddhism through poetry, or did you find poetry through Buddhism, or did they develop at the same time? How did you enter this sort of space that you're in?
Yeah, I mean, they're sort of co-arising for me. When I first started writing, I had a good friend who was a meditator, and so I was in my early 20s, and he taught me how to meditate, and so those two practices started about the same time. Started writing poems before that, but I didn't really become a serious meditator. I didn't start doing retreats until about 22 years ago. And since then, it's been a gradual kind of integration of spiritual practice and my writing practice. So they kind of arose together, and then have kind of deepened the integration. I think when I was in graduate school, like the way poems were talked about often seemed kind of lifeless to me. It seemed like, especially in the PhD programs and the more academic teachers, and it didn't appeal to me. It felt like it was missing something that felt really important to me. So I started to kind of detach from the academic world and the academic way of kind of reading poems. And so that led me to like, well, what is it? What is it that poems do, I think, most importantly? And that started to lead me down a path of investigating the spiritual dimension of poetry.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
Well, let's hear another poem so we make sure we get them in, but I want to talk a lot more about this.
Yeah. Well, I'll read Swift's. This is the next poem, not the very next poem in the book, but the next one I want to read. Swift's For My Father. Early fall, the light thin and brittle, and if it's true that deprivation is a gift, I accept the gift. I walk down to Wallace Park to watch the swifts that roost every September in the Chapman School's tall brick chimney. The charming swifts, with their long forked tails and swept back wings, 10,000 of them swerving and darting in the evening sky, a flowing, expandable spiral of birds, clearing the air of insects and riveting the wandering human mind. Tonight, there must be 300 spectators, a whole hillside of us, ordinary people whose wings fell off eons ago, who traded flight for speech and have regretted it ever since, sodden and earthbound as we are, except for our lifted eyes, our oohs and ahs that show we're still alive when the peregrine falcon dives in and knifes one out of the air, which we boo or cheer sometimes simultaneously. We love this passion play of form and formlessness, the bird's shifting patterns flung out like a whiplash of water or school of fish above the stationary human school, then drawn tight together, a miracle they don't crash into each other, a miracle of echolocation until you see them as they truly are, a single organism, a body made mostly of air and quick decisions, jagged motions that gradually cohere. A poem, in other words. It takes the flock a full 20 minutes to funnel down into the chimney, and it seems a living smoke pulled back into the still and sleeping fire. So beautiful, I forget for a moment my father's death, or I turn my mind away from it, or no, I open my grief to accommodate this wonder, and wonder what he might have thought of it, were we standing here together. The kind of thing we never did, and now will never do, except in my imagination. That unchanging inner sky where the swifts take flight whenever I want them to, and my father cannot die.
Yeah, and that was Swifts again, an earlier poem in the book, No Day at the Beach by John Brehm, that we're talking about today. So you mentioned being really interested in what poems do, like what they're actually doing. And I've been really interested in that too. And it is, I think there's a tendency not to want to talk in like broad, ways as if it's like universal to what poems are doing. But it's always felt to me like it actually is broad and universal. And it feels like poems all have a thing in common, which is a kind of a meditative, a meditative consciousness, I'd say, or something like that, there's this some other dimension that we're accessing of our own psyche when we make not just poetry but all art. One of the quotes that's sort of up in my head all the time is from Elizabeth Bishop. It's from a letter she wrote to somebody who I can't remember, but she said, what we want from great art is the same thing that's necessary for its creation, and that is a self-forgetful, perfectly useless concentration. And that sort of self-forgetfulness is so key to all. Like if you talk, I've interviewed 300 poets probably at this point. And everybody talks about losing themselves, losing a sense of time, being lost in a poem, not knowing where they're going, all those kind of things where it's this, they're going somewhere they don't know, that they're not, it's not a usual mental space, and everyone's going, when a poem's working, that's where people are going. So how do you conceive of that? And how can you talk about like what poems are doing? Like, what are they actually doing?
Yeah. Well, that's a beautiful thing. I mean, Elizabeth Bishop is my favorite poet. And I quote that very quote passage from one of her letters in the essay on Elizabeth Bishop in the Dharma of Poetry. So I'm just delighted that you picked that. Feels very simpatico. And yeah, I agree. I mean, I think that poems come out of, great poems or inspired poems come out of flow states of consciousness where the small self falls away, the egoic concerns fall away, and the mind gets bigger and more spacious. And there is access to a kind of consciousness that we don't typically access in the course of our daily lives as we're going about doing what needs to get done. And when we're caught in our conditioning and, reactive and focused on our problems in a very egoic way of grasping and aversion. But the great poems that get written come out, I believe, of these flow states, and they embody those flow states and make them available to us as readers. So when you read a poem and you enter it in the same spirit, not the analytical spirit, but a appreciative spirit, a spirit of imaginative, deep engagement, then we can absorb, we can participate in the flow state of consciousness that the poet was in and that is still alive in the poem and available to us. So, and flow states of consciousness seem to me inherently spiritual, inherently universal, and deeply connecting and wonderful, refreshing to experience for sure. So yeah, I think that's really crucial.
Yeah, I mean, it feels spiritual to me. I remember, taking classes in comparative religion, and as an undergraduate, just for fun, and talking about how all religions sort of have the same sense of motion, which is from a self consciousness to a global consciousness or to a higher consciousness, and it seems like that's what poems do. And so it feels like poems feel like prayers, a kind of secular prayer. Would you say that?
Yes, yeah, I think that's a wonderful way to describe them. Yeah, it's a way of making contact with the sacred, remembering that the sacred actually exists and is alive, and that we can get lost in illusion. We can get cut off from that. Poems are wonderful reminders of the sacred. They take us there in an embodied way because they're not just intellectual exercises. They engage our emotions and our imaginations and our bodies. And so there's a fullness and a richness of the poetic experience that I think is a wonderful conduit for that kind of spiritual energy to enter our lives. Mm-hmm. It's so often, our culture is designed to make us forget all that. And so we need these reminders to bring us back to that fundamental connection with all things. Yeah.
And why would you say that is? Why do you think our culture is so resistant to that kind of spiritual space, or that kind of consciousness that rises above the, deterministic, materialistic plane that we're buying things on?
Yeah. Well, yeah, I mean, there's a long, complicated answer to that, but I think that, you named it, the materialism, and, we have built an economic system that is absolutely dependent on people being in a state of grasping and aversion, precisely those afflictive mind states that the Buddha identified as the source of our suffering. But if people were really content and focused on the spiritual life, the economy would collapse. I mean, it thrives on discontentment, on dissatisfaction, and so I mean, it's not like people sit around in a room and say, "How can we make people, unhappy and dissatisfied?" Although they might, it wouldn't surprise me.
Well,
But
actually,
but
yeah.
yeah, go
Well,
ahead.
just now that you put it that way, I hadn't really thought of it. But like, in Buddhism, all is suffering, all is dukkha, and the two sort of hands or the sides of the coin are wanting something you don't have, or fearing to lose something that you do have, and that could be described as every advertisement ever, with trying to make you want something you don't have or lose something that you don't have. And so, in a way, our culture is built, the advertising culture anyway, that the capitalist culture is built on suffering. If you see it through that perspective.
Yeah, it exploits that instead of trying to heal that sense of separation and grasping and aversion, as the Buddha tried to do. It sees that like that's a fundamental part of our human nature, and it exploits that, exacerbates it, and exploits it for its own purposes. So it's challenging, and we're so conditioned, we just swim in that water, and we're not really aware that we're acting according to these deep assumptions that we rarely stop to examine. So, yeah.
Well, I want to make sure we keep reading poems. So let's do another poem. And maybe a good one is that, where's it? Blathery Performance is a good one, talking about these kind of concepts of the ego and trying to lose it. So that was a fun poem.
That's the one I was going to read next. Yeah, sometimes I like to, part of my spiritual practice is first of all, identifying what the ego is up to, just kind of seeing the pervasiveness of egoic concerns in one's life, and kind of showing that up, kind of taking the air out of that by looking at it directly and having some fun with it. And this is a poem that does that. And this is a longish poem, and it's a very prosy poem. Blathery Performance. Sometimes the ego is a one-man marching band, high-stepping down Main Street, pounding a bass drum with one hand, mouth farting through a tuba with the other. That's how I feel anyway, when I look back at some of my blathery performances, where I sharpen my wit on other people's weaknesses, reel off judgments and opinions like decrees, jump on every opportunity to say something funny, however hurtful it might be. When I asked a friend to give me the gossip about a certain writers' workshop where I teach once a year, she said there's tension around who has to drive visiting authors to and from the airport, and she doesn't want to do it anymore. That's it, I said. Friction over who has to pick up the big shots from the airport? That's all you've got? Laughing, but really looking for conflict, intrigue, gross incompetence, juicy misconduct, while silently noting that no one offers to drive me. And then I launched into my spiel about MFA programs, their plenitude, the dependency they spawn, churning out poets by the hundreds every year. We don't need any more poets, I said. We have more than enough already. I tossed off Philip Larkin's remark about how he missed the days when writing poetry was slightly disreputable, and you had to hide your notebook under the bed when somebody knocked at the door. I trotted out my anecdote about giving a talk at the AWP conference on finding work outside academia, and how a young woman, a recent graduate of an MFA program, raised her hand to express her anxiety that without a workshop and prompts and deadlines, she wouldn't be able to write. And my first thought was, well, in that case, you're not a writer. Of course, I didn't say that then, but here I was proudly proclaiming my unempathic thought, holding up my meanness as if it were wisdom. And then quoting Flannery O'Connor, who, when asked if she thought universities were stifling young writers, replied, "They don't stifle enough of them." At this point, my friend frowned a little, but did that slow me down? Not at all. I pulled out another practiced remark about how in America, anything worth doing is worth overdoing. And if having 20 MFA programs is good, 200 is even better. And thus the glut of mediocre writers with the unspoken implication that all this noise was drowning out the brilliance of my own work. Young people shouldn't be encouraged to write. Young people shouldn't be encouraged to write poetry, I said. No one encouraged me to become a poet, certainly not my parents, who thought it was a bizarre waste of time and suggested I learn a trade instead. And look how well I turned out. The conversation went on in this vein for some time, and you may notice that while I seem to be proffering these harsh judgments as examples of ego run amok, and thus disavowing them, I am also giving voice to them and secretly hoping you'll agree with at least some of them. And then I announced that I had just been accepted into a mindfulness meditation teacher training program, and how excited I was to be moving into a new kind of teaching, bringing my spiritual practice and my poetry into greater alignment, how I plan to offer a weekly poetry and meditation class. I could not feel the angels of irony looking down at me as I said this, but I feel them now, raising their angelic eyebrows, scratching their celestial chins, wondering how anyone so mired in judgment could possibly teach mindfulness. Maybe you should try practicing it first, I can almost hear them thinking. And now I see that in describing, confessing my obsessive, relentless self-concern, I'm really seeking affirmation for my honesty, and that in admitting this hidden motive, I am further promoting an image of myself as a person of fearless self-awareness, and so on and so forth, down the infinite hall of mirrors that is the ego and its sly maneuverings. Ah, the ego, it won't enjoy being spoken of in this way, pinned to the page, undercut, exposed, its bag of tricks revealed. Even now, it's angling for an advantage, trying to make a comeback, looking for a way to end this poem that will bring praise, applause, a prize, maybe even a ride to the airport, which is not going to happen.
Yeah, that was great. That was a blathery performance by John Brehm from No Day at the Beach. And there's so many directions I want to take it after that poem. I'm not even sure which one to do. But do you think, I mean, one of the things I always think about is that how this sort of industry of poetry, if you want to call it that or something, in a way, it's cranking out poets like that with, it is, I mean, it's a pyramid scheme, as it functions. But at the same time, poetry is a kind of meditation, and we're sort of making people have the kind of mindset where they notice things and enter that meditative space and have spiritual prayer. Do you think that that everybody can be a poet, and do you think that every poet is a Buddhist? I mean, those are two things that I always think about. Are poets unwitting Buddhists? Because we sit and meditate and sort of try to lose ourselves in that space, and we're drawn to that. And I think poets maybe come out in a better place because of it. And what do you think of all that?
Yeah, I mean, I guess I would say that I do think poetry is inherently spiritual in some way, regardless of the kind of poems you write or the content. I just feel like it is an engagement with the world, with one's own experience, with consciousness that is inherently not materialistic. It goes against the grain of that kind of conditioning and the cultural trend. I don't know that I would say that it's necessarily Buddhist, but meditative. I mean, if broadly defined, I think that's true. I do think that, I mean, my practice is I sit and wait until I feel inspired to write something, and that is rather unusual these days, and partly because of MFA programs. Everyone that I know really uses prompts, consistently, or at least sometimes. And some people rely on them pretty pretty exclusively, and so that sort of short circuits the open kind of waiting, meditative, allowing things to arise, to come into consciousness as they will. It's there's a little bit of grasping, seeking, in feeling like I want to write something, so I'm going to use this prompt to get me there.
Mm-hmm.
And having said that, I mean, I have friends who use prompts that write these incredible poems that you just are so thankful that they came into the world, and who cares if they came through a prompt or not. So I have mixed feelings about it. I'm not sure. You asked if everyone can be a poet, and I think the answer to that is probably no.
Yeah.
I mean, you know, I'd love to be a classical pianist. You know, I don't think that's going to happen. You know, or so there are certain kinds of predispositions that you need to have to become a poet, and you know, ways of working with language that just, you know, many people are just not, you know, interested in. But I think we all have a sense of the poetic. We feel it when it shows up in our lives, you know, in our experience, or somebody says something in a certain way, or you know, you read a poem, or you see something in the world, and there's a quality of recognizing, there's something magical there that you might describe as poetic. And I think we all have the capacity to engage with that, and to see it and to know it.
Mm-hmm. Well, I would say, I think that, you know, we're all poets as children, and then the ego takes over and we lose the capacity. And then, you know, poets as adults are people who are trying to go back to that childlike state of wonder and awe, and, you know, that kind of, you know, holistic, non-deterministic comprehension that that children have and grasp for as they're learning about the world. And so I kind of feel like that we're all already poets, would be my impression of that.
That's a wonderful way. That's a wonderful way to put it. That's our true nature. When I was talking about like poems reminding us of our true nature, yeah, it's the nature that precedes the conditioning, that has that open, curious, alive, enthusiastic, joyful, you know, everything is wonderful, you know, and you're seen through a child's eyes. You know, I'm writing about this wonderful haiku. I want to share it with you, by a poet named Christopher Harold. Cherry petals, a child adds a handful to the busker's cap.
That's great.
Isn't that nice?
It is. I think we agree pretty much about most things as far as this topic goes. But I think the prompts, we might have a big disagreement there, because I think prompts are a way of turning off the mind and letting you, like, I always think of Zen and the Art of Archery as a great book on writing, even though it's not. It's about archery. But you know, they say you know, that you can't shoot the arrow for the sake of hitting the target, or the further the target will recede. You know, you have too much willful will if you're aiming for something like that. And I think what prompts do is let you focus on something that's not important, and then let the important things bubble up, and let yourself sort of be lost. And I'd say it's the same thing as going to like a retreat. You know, you need that space, you need that certain kind of silence, the bell, the sitting, to enter that sacred space, right? You have these kind of prompts in a way by going to a place like that. And then and so a prompt is the same thing, I think, where it's sort of like a scaffolding that you don't really need once you get there, but it helps you enter the right mood, the right mental space.
You might be right about that. You might. I've never thought about it in that way. I think you might be changing my mind. I mean, the sense that it comes from something else, so it's not. So the ego is excluded from that. Like, you're not finding something yourself. It's kind of being given to you. And so maybe there's a way in which that's kind of liberating. I like that idea.
Yeah,
so
and I think that's what formal poets do too. I think, you know, in a way, it's that focusing on something else that sort of distracts the monkey mind. So focusing on meter and rhyme lets the subconscious mind come up, and surprising things happen, and be in touch with that deeper, more connected, interconnected voice that we all have.
Yeah, I see that. I think in my own practice, I just know my best poems have just come unbidden. And there's something really wonderful about that, when a poem comes in that way. And so it feels, I have a kind of allegiance to that way of writing. However, I because I write that way, I don't write a lot. not that the world is clamoring for more poems
Oh,
from
I
me.
think they would. I'd love more books, John. I've read 2 of your 3, and they're great. Um, so I'm curious though. How do the poems come to be? Like, do you know, like, if you're waiting for inspiration, how does the inspiration come? Are you out in the world, and then say, oh, that's a poem that I need to sit down and write, or are you like sitting at a desk with a blank piece of paper waiting for something to happen?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the latter now mostly. I mean, um, there have been times where I've been out and poems will come to me when I'm out in the woods or just see something. Especially when I lived in New York City, you'd see something on the street. I mean, there's some drama is always happening, and that would spark poems. And now it's more, I get up very early in the morning and go to my desk first thing and just kind of create a sort of space for poems to come if they're ready to come. But it's mysterious, it's really mysterious. I mean, the poem Swifts, my father had died, and I saw this extraordinary spectacle of the Swifts. It's a yearly thing in Portland, and it's quite astonishing. And so those two things came together, and generated the energy for this particular poem. So a lot of times it's circumstantial like that, like things will just kind of arise and touch off the imagination in some way. And sometimes, I'll just wake up in a particular kind of energy, and I don't know how to describe it, but when it's present, a good poem always comes. And unfortunately, that doesn't happen all that often. But when it does, it's like I feel it, and it's like, okay, now I know a good poem is on the way, and I get sort of taken over by it. But I have not found a way to induce that energy to show up.
Yeah. Well, if only you could.
Yeah,
so
right.
there's a bunch of questions already, but let me remind you, if you have any questions for John, leave them in the chat windows. Facebook, there aren't many people there for some reason, but there's a ton of people on YouTube and a bunch of questions already. But leave your questions on the Facebook or YouTube chats, and I'll pass them along. But let's keep going and hear another poem, John.
Yeah. What do I want to read? Well, I'll read the title poem, and some people have heard me read this poem before, but as my mother used to say, it won't hurt you to hear it again. No Day at the Beach, and this is I like to use dialogue in poems, and sometimes I just build a poem entirely on a spoken exchange, and this is a poem of that nature where it's just a straight up kind of transcription of a conversation that I had quite a while ago. No Day at the Beach. It's no day at the beach being me, I said. It's no walk in the park. I can see that, she said. Trust me, I said. It's no picnic. Clearly, she said. What's that supposed to mean? I said. I'm just agreeing with you, she said. You might have argued a bit, I said. Tried to convince me otherwise. Who knows? Maybe it is a day at the beach being me, or maybe it's a day at the beach being with me. No, she said, it's not.
Yeah, that was the title poem from this book, No Day at the Beach, and a good example of the humor that runs throughout the book. And the Buddha was a humorous, playful type of personality as well, so that fits really well. How much do you think? It's interesting too. You talk a lot about humor as being a negative thing in the past, as putting people down and at other people's expense, and but then to sort of harness humor for a teaching purpose seems to be one of the things that this book is doing. So is that a conscious thing that you've tried to do, is to regulate and re-guide your humor into a better place?
Yeah, it's a little more acceptable to make fun of yourself rather than other people. But yeah, at a certain point, when I first started writing, I thought I just had the sense that poems had to be somber and melancholy and very serious and kind of dark, the deep image movement was really, foreground at that time. And so poets like Robert Bly and James Wright, W.S. Merwin, there wasn't a lot of humor or playfulness there. These poets were very serious, and I kind of absorbed the zeitgeist. And then at a certain point, when I started reading the New York School, when I started reading Frank O'Hara and Kenneth Koch and John Ashbery and James Schuyler and others, I started to see poems can bring in the full human response to our experience. So they can be funny, they can be playful, and when I saw that as a possibility, it just woke something up in me. And that's been a big part of my poetic practice since then, of just not trying to be funny, but just kind of recognizing the absurdities inherent in the human condition and the crazy things that we do and think and say, the crazy ways we see the world, and just taking advantage of the humor that's inherently there and having fun with it. And I think poems that can generate a kind of shared laughter are really connecting. That's a deep and healing connection when we laugh in response to the human predicament that we're all stuck in. We're all trying to do the best we can and usually failing. And laughing about it is one way to make it a little more palatable.
Yeah, for sure. Let's see. Let's do since the poems in the book sort of alternate between, not really alternate strictly, but between shorter poems and long poems. Do you want to read like two of the shorter ones, maybe introductions and then Nebraska?
Yeah, that's a great idea. Let me just see introductions.
36 for introductions. And
36. Yeah. This is very short, and this is a poem in the voice of the ego. Introductions. Now I use my business cards to squash the ants that crawl across my desk so impudently, it's as if they don't know who I am.
And the introductions. And then Nebraska's on page 52 if you want to.
And actually, before that, let me read another really short poem called Etiquette.
Okay. Which page is that?
Oh, sorry, page 49.
Okay.
Etiquette. Here in New York City, smiling is frowned upon, and looking up, looked down upon.
Yeah, that's great.
And Nebraska on page 52. Nebraska. After watching Nebraska, a film shot entirely in black and white in my home state, I told my friend as the credits rolled, they shot that in color. That's just what Nebraska looks like. And he said, really? And I said, Jesus, no, man. Secretly happy he considered it.
Yeah, that was Nebraska too, from No Day at the Beach. Would you say that all the short poems are written in the voice of the ego? Is that kind of seems that way, now that I think about it.
No, not entirely. In fact, let me read one more that's not in the voice. That's in the voice of a kind of deeper consciousness. It's called Walk the Talk, and it's on page 56. Okay. Walk the Talk. Sometimes I think human beings are just a way for words to walk around on earth, and words just a way for wind to hear itself think.
Yeah, that is Walk the Talk. And those poems especially feel like koans. There's that short, do you think what do you think poems and koans have in common?
Well, they can stop the mind, stop the habitual momentum of the mind that is always trying to understand the world in terms of what it already knows. And so the koan, you can't do that. And I haven't done formal koan practice, so I don't really know that much about it. But what I do know is that you can't think the same way that you think about your ordinary life and how you solve problems. You can't bring that to a koan and actually have an illuminating experience. It asks you to step out of the conditioned mind and to let go of the habitual ways of thinking and feeling and knowing and understanding. And I think poems can do that too. Poems ask us to see the world in a different way, to understand ourselves in a different way, to let go of what we think we know and see what else arises.
Here's a question from Cindy Gore in the audience. She says, John, please share your thoughts about readers savoring moments in a poem. I think we all could enjoy poetry even more with this. So I think she's talking about something in particular. What's she talking about?
Yeah, I talk about that a lot in the Dharma of Poetry and in my own teaching. I invite students to engage with poetry, with a poem, mostly through noticing and just appreciating kind of entering the poem, not analytically, but in this appreciative mode. And part of that is to just stay with, like, when you find a line or a passage or even just a word or a tone, a movement in a poem, to really savor it, to just feel it, stay with it. Don't even think about it so much, but just let yourself absorb it. Let it kind of come into your system. And that has a kind of richness to it and an aliveness to it that is really wonderful. And we too often skip over that and think, well, now I have to work on this, or I have to kind of figure it out, or I have to think of something smart to say about it, or I have to make sure I'm getting it. And same is true with our lives, right? I mean, we have beautiful experiences. We see things, we have interactions with people that are wonderful. And we tend to skip over that so we can get back to our problems, our default mode of like figuring out our problems. And so savoring in our lives, savoring in poems can help us bring that attitude, that appreciative attention to our lives as well. So I think that's really, really important. And it just makes it more fun. I mean, you read poems and you come to a stanza or a line that's just astonishing. You just want to read it over and over again. And it's a beautiful thing to do.
That goes along with something I think about a lot, in that, academic criticism kind of kills literature. If you look back at this, since university have been the standard, and we've had those programs, not just MFAs, but literature programs in general, there's a sort of need to generate criticism. And so the work that's held up is stuff that, like if you want to be, taught in colleges, the key is to make a group and have a manifesto and then, have something that's changed that you can talk about and that you can have a critical sort of essays and books talking about. And so there's this whole sort of flow toward that kind of mindset of analyzing and picking things apart instead of just feeling. Do you think that that's been a problem? You mentioned walking away from that kind of landscape when dealing with poetry. Is that something that you think about a lot?
It is. Well, I haven't had any real contact with academia for quite a long time. But, in this new collection I'm working on, one of the things I'm writing about is when I was in grad school, not poets, but professors and PhD students would often talk about interrogating a poem. And seemingly unaware of or unbothered by the associations between interrogation and torture. And I was struck by that, like, to use that word, like that's the energy you're going to bring to the poem. I'm going to interrogate it, because it's not enough to appreciate it or explore it or to love it or to learn from it. You had to like bring it into your power, and make it say what you wanted it to say, by violence if necessary. And so I think that, and I checked this out with my dear friend Heather Sellers, who is in academia, and I said, is that still prevalent? And she said, yes, that way of engaging poetry is still pretty dominant in academic settings. I think that's starting to change. I hope that's starting to change. But yeah, I think that's harmful. I think it comes from a desire to manipulate and control. And I think many of the crises that we're now having to face come out of that desire to control rather than be with the natural world as it is. This desire to master it and control it is caused, just incalculable damage. And so that's an instance of that. I think the same kind of energy.
Yeah, I think what Billy Collins says about tying a poem to a chair and beating a confession out of it, or whatever, however that goes. And also just talking about poetry as a spiritual practice and poems being like prayers. It feels a lot too like the like the priest, the high priest interpreting the word of God for us, so we don't us mortals don't have to get in the way and then don't have a direct connection, which then justifies their position as priests in the the temple. It's just fascinating how the world comes around and around.
Yeah, and I would say that I think there are lots of brilliant people in academia who are doing incredibly good work. You can't just sort of write off the whole
Hmm.
institution. But I think that those kinds of ways
Yeah.
of are still
Hmm.
unfortunate.
Yeah, true. In the same way, though, that they're great priests,
Yeah, right,
But
right.
yeah. Well, let's do another poem. Do you want to do that? Which one was the longer one? The Dick's Kitchen Metaphysical.
Sure. Yeah. Dick's Kitchen Metaphysical. When I set aside the book about knowledge of higher worlds and how to attain it, dog-earing the passage that explains why the initiate must listen without judgment to whatever is being said, however contrary or noxious it might be, the waitress at Dick's Kitchen asked me if I'm still working on everything. And I answer yes, because I'm not only lingering over my turkey burger and sweet yam knot fries, but pondering questions of life and death and how to access the mystical realm that shimmers like a heat mirage at the center of all things. But when she further inquires if my food is still tasting well, I feel myself plummeting back into the lower worlds where all I do is silently correct my fellow human beings for the way they dress or drive or speak or think, peppering them with sarcastic questions or barking at them in my head like a full-blown crazy person. How could you vote for that apoplectic, orange-faced, racist ignoramus? Or, oh, for the love of Christ, yes, you can turn right on red. That's been a rule for about 40 years. I guess they forgot to tell you. But then I remember the section on patience, forbearance, and non-anger, which I had been tempted to skip, that says, every symptom of impatience produces a paralyzing effect on the higher faculties. And suddenly I see them, my higher faculties, frozen like statues in attitudes of agony and strife, like Rodin's prisoners or Michelangelo's slaves. Wisdom languishing in chains, compassion with downcast eyes, kindness struggling to rise from the stone.
That was Dick's Kitchen Metaphysical from No Day at the Beach. I keep meaning to say at the beginning of the show that there's an open mic afterward, and I forgot. So let me say it now. If you have any poems you'd like to share, because there's a good number of people watching, probably for the first time. If you'd like to share a poem later in the second hour, I'll put up instructions, but have a poem ready, and you can join the Zoom. I'll give the Zoom link, and you can share poems if you want. So everybody participate. This is always a participatory, thing. It's not just two people talking. It's a whole group of people doing stuff and loving poetry and having that spiritual connection to the world, which we're all also fond of. John, this is kind of a personal thing I want to talk about for me, because I'm a huge fan of Ian McGilchrist in The Master and His Emissary, and I know you've read Ian McGilchrist, and
Yeah.
I wonder what you think, because I've never. So I talked to him in the interview for the winter issue of Rattle, which I don't think you've seen. I don't think you're a subscriber. I'll send you a copy so you can read it, but I haven't talked to anybody who's a fan of McGilchrist and a poet and also a Buddhist. So I'm curious what you think about his concept of the right and left hemisphere and how it corresponds to Buddhism, because it feels to me, for people who don't know what we're talking about, McGilchrist's work focuses on all the research in neuroscience into how the left brain functions as the emissary that kind of thinks it knows it all but doesn't really see the big picture. It has a very focused mindset. And that's kind of like the typical place we're in, worrying about bills and traffic in the office and all those kind of mundane little things we're focused on. And then the right hemisphere has this much bigger holistic view of the world, but the left brain kind of takes over. And it feels to me like what we're doing always is not really so much stripping away self-consciousness necessarily as the left hemisphere's control of our minds, and letting the right hemisphere speak for the first time, letting the master who knows more than us as the emissary speak. Do you feel like how that plays into poetry and Buddhism? Is that something that what do you think about that?
Yeah, I mean, I think McGilchrist is just utterly brilliant. I mean, I think The Master and His Emissary is just, one of those books that is life-changing when you read it. I mean, you just suddenly see the world in a completely different way. And I've read parts of his latest book, which is even bigger than The Master and His Emissary, which is quite a tome. The Matter with Things. I think that his way of identifying the different ways the hemispheres work, the different worlds they present to us, they have different ways of perceiving. And so when the left hemisphere is dominant, it actually shows us a different world. And when it usurps the right hemisphere, that world is rather dead, and it's a world that the mind wants to control and manipulate. It loses its organic aliveness, and he convincingly argues that's the fundamental problem that we have right now, is that we have created a world to reflect the left hemisphere's ways of seeing and the way it wants to order the world, and it's been hugely destructive. And so I think spiritual practice, the practice of poetry, is a way of affirming the right hemisphere way of seeing and being in the world, and strengthening that, and reminding us of the richness of that when we engage with the world from that perspective, how much more alive and sacred it is. It's left hemisphere drains it. It reduces the world to the most materialistic, expedient set of values that are just incredibly destructive.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, especially in politics too. It strikes me as because the left is the either or, the good or evil. Seeing everything through those binaries, and then the right is and instead of either or, and
the right is also attuned to ambiguity, to irony, to humor, all those things, that subtlety, to gradations of meaning, all those things that you need to be a poet or to appreciate poetry or art of any kind. The left brain has no use for those things, and it gives us a world where those things are absent. So it's really important.
Yeah, I think so too. And I even think that that feeling of Emily Dickinson's head being taken, the top of her head being taken off, is the hemispheres being in harmony for a brief period of time, which a poem can do.
Right. Yeah, because you need the left hemisphere to understand what's going on, to bring some order to your experience, but it has to be in service of the right hemisphere, that more holistic, organic way of seeing. Yeah. That's so great. You interviewed him?
Yeah, I got to interview him. It was really fun over Zoom, just like this. So we'll release it as a podcast too, I think.
I have to watch that.
He's I'll send you the issue though, so you can read it. It's this winter's issue.
Absolutely.
But I've been a huge fan of him for 10 years, so it was a big highlight getting to talk to him. Let's see. Let's do, I think we have two more poems you wanted to read. Let's do one poem and then one question and then one poem, Over the Moon, and then we'll finish off with a new poem.
Okay, great. This is the last poem in the book, Over the Moon, and it's for my wife, Alice. 5 a.m., the soft percussion of the rain on the slanted rooftop of my study. I study it, a single drop dropping again and again at 1 second intervals, like the ticking of a watery clock above my head. Off to my right, it comes down in loose clusters, an absent-minded thrumming of fingers on a tabletop, random, irregular, or falling in a pattern I can't perceive. It's too dark to see the rain as it falls, only the reflection of my room projected onto the empty space beyond my window. An old Norse word made from two other words, wind and I. My bookcases float blurrily in the air above the alley. I tap the keyboard and words appear. And now the rain appears to be hesitating or reconsidering, though it will likely fall all day long on the bamboo trees I cannot see, the glory bower, the lilacs and azaleas readying themselves, summoning their flowers from the depths of non-existence, 3 kinds of Japanese maples, and the improbable ferns, huge and flame-like, heart-shaped, that edge the yard. Last night, we stopped and stepped backward when we crossed a sidewalk puddle where the moon had fallen between a reflection of root-like branches and swiftly passing clouds to hover underneath us. As above, so below, the old alchemist said, everything mirroring everything else, falling and rising and falling. We lingered looking down, then stepped over the moon and came home.
Yeah, that was Over the Moon, beautiful poem by John Brehm. There was one question about consciousness. I wanted to, somebody left, but I can't find it again. I'm sorry to whoever asked that. But maybe I'll keep looking for it as you answer this. But I'm wondering too, we've really covered the way that writing poems is a spiritual practice. It's really, it's great for the mind and soul to be encountering the world that way and creating things from that space where you're not the ego. But what about sharing poems? Once you've done that, why publish a book? Isn't that the ego, getting back in the picture? And is that okay?
Well, that can be. I mean, yeah, the ego can become a part of that process and sort of take it over. The left brain can take it over and use it as a sort of self-glorifying project. It's hard to keep that completely out of it. But I think, the real motivation is this desire to connect. I think that's why we write. It's a desire to connect and to share. And I think of poems as being, a kind of relational field of consciousness. So the poem doesn't really come alive until a reader engages, brings their own consciousness to the consciousness that is embedded in the poem. And then there's this kind of alchemical reaction that happens, this transformation where the consciousness of the reader, the consciousness that created the poem, which is still present there, they come together, and the poem comes alive in that moment. So I think that's really important. And I think it's most powerful when it's done in a group. When you have a group of people and you're sharing poems in this spirit, where the collective intelligence of the group is lighting up the poem, then that can be even more profound than a solitary experience of the poem. But I think it's a desire to connect that is the main reason to publish the poems and to make them available to others.
Yeah, that's a great answer to that tough question. So I guess one last question from the audience. Andrea Hollander's here. You probably know Andrea.
Indeed.
You just shared a haiku by another poet. Can you talk about how haiku has affected you as a reader, a poet, and a human?
Oh, wow. As a reader, a poet, and a human. I wasn't much interested in haiku until, about a year or so ago, maybe a year and a half ago. And, I had read the great Japanese poets, Busan and Basho and Issa and some others. And then I started reading more contemporary haiku. And there's a really thriving world of haiku writers who are just doing brilliant work, like Christopher Harold, the poet I read earlier. And I'm going to include haiku writers in this new anthology I'm working on that's going to come out in 2024. I think, haiku is I think most closely associated with Zen practice. And there's a quality of just this, so in a haiku, you don't have there's no room for commentary for the mind to kind of get over involved the way it can often do. It's just a moment of, kind of pure perception. And there's a kind of clarity and simplicity in that aesthetic that I find really appealing. And it's, I've written haiku, and it's a, people think haiku is easy. And it's like, yeah, try it sometime. It's easy to write a bad one. But it's a wonderful practice. I mean, it makes you pay attention to the small things that you might not otherwise stop and really look at or think much about. And that's good for the writer. It's good for the person to just begin to notice and see and bring that kind of simplicity and just thisness of the Zen way of looking.
Yeah, great. Yeah, that's, one of the two reasons that I end with a haiku every episode. Yeah. Let's. I guess you have a new book, or new poems, new books in the works. Is there anything you can tell us about the new project you're working on, and how these poems fit together, or are they just the kind of thing where you're just writing and seeing what comes up later? Is there sort of where you are in the book stage for another book?
Well, yeah, I have another book that's actually in process right now. So it's going to come out in September from Wisdom Publications, and it's called Dharma Talk. And so it is even more explicitly engaged with the Dharma.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a lot of short poems. There's haiku in it. There's some longer narrative poems. But the Dharma practice is more foregrounded. But that book is done. And yeah, it'll be out in September. And then I'm working on a new anthology called The Poetry of Grief, Gratitude, and Reverence.
Mm-hmm.
And these are poems from 20th and 21st century, mostly American poets, but some European poets as well, South American. And there are poems that I feel, even though many of them are not by poets or Buddhists, they embody and reflect the Dharma in ways that I think lend themselves to spiritual practice in really beautiful ways. So I'm hoping too that book, like its predecessor, The Poetry of Impermanence, Mindfulness, and Joy, will be taken up by people who are engaged in spiritual practice. It doesn't have to be Buddhist practice, and that the poems will be supportive of that and illuminating of the human predicament and the state we find ourselves in, and the way these beautiful beings, these wonderful poets, have responded to that. It's a joy to bring these incredible poems together. I have 3 poems by Andrea Hollander are in the book, and but there's just a wealth of extraordinary writing that's being done, and it's just an honor to be able to, gather together the poems that I find most compelling, and to create an experience in the book that is coherent and cohesive and rich and alive.
Yeah, well, that's great. We'll definitely have to have you on for a segment when those books come out too.
Yeah, that'd be great.
So you wanted to read a poem from the new book. This is Morning East Wallingford, right?
Yeah, and this is a poem I wrote a few summers ago in Vermont. Morning, East Wallingford. Morning in East Wallingford, not to be confused with Wallingford proper, down the road a few miles here in Vermont. A bifurcated village. Nothing much is happening. We had a thunderstorm last night, and now bullfrogs are squawking from the pond as if the storm had lodged fragments of thunder in their throats, a wet and rubbery sound, mildly insistent, counterpointed by faint bird song against a backdrop of highway traffic, cars and trucks, the human contribution to the soundscape. The Luna moth we found last night affixed to the porch railing is gone, swept away by the wind probably. A fabulous creature, green and leaf-like, with delicate orange ferns for antenna and a curlicue on each wing, added for what purpose? A mystery. My wife is asleep upstairs, her mother and father a little further down the road. I sit here feeling content, even as I know the world as we know it is ending. Happiness resting in the pit of my stomach, a calm excitement, my mind free of anger, resentment, ambition, regret. 12 raindrops hang from the window sash, gathering weight. 1 or 2 look ready to fall, but who knows when that will happen? Pearled, light-filled, each one a condensation of cloud called downward by invisible forces, just as we are, falling but not yet fallen, held between earth and sky, then and now the rain begins again.
Yeah, that's a great poem. That was Morning East Wallingford from John's forthcoming book. What was the title of the book again, John?
Dharma Talk.
Dharma Talk, that's right. So look for Dharma Talk this fall coming up. John, thanks for being a guest. It's been a real pleasure talking to you. It was just a lot of fun and great poems too. You really can't beat this. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, thanks so much for having me. It's just wonderful. All the points of connection that we discovered, really delightful. So thank you so much. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, definitely. Thanks, John. Take care.
Thank you.
And that was John Brehm, and you can find all of John Brehm's work at johnbrehmpoet.com. That's John with an H, Brehm, Brehm, poet.com. So find his website there and order his books because they're wonderful books. Especially, I really want a copy. I'm glad he's going to send me a free copy. I appreciate that of the Dharma of Poetry. That's going to be great reading. But thanks again to John for joining us and sharing all his work today. We are going to take a quick break and go to the open lines. Now, how the open lines work, I'll put this on screen. First, before you do anything else, email your poem so I have them here and can show them on screen while you do it. Email your poem if you'd like to share one to OpenMic. That's openmic@rattle.com. Then I'm going to grab the Zoom link and throw it in the chat windows, either on Facebook or YouTube. You can join us, but only join us if you want to share a poem, because the stream just continues right where you are. If you just want to sit and watch, it's the best place to watch is on YouTube or Facebook or Twitter, because you can read along with a poet, and you don't have to do anything. So just stay tight. But if you want to share a poem, email us at openmic@rattle.com. Then join me at the Zoom link, and we'll see how many poets we have. Sometimes we have a chance to read two, usually just one. There was a prompt this week. They can be prompt poems. They can be poems about current events. They can be poems you published recently and are proud of. Whatever you would like to share, come on over and share it, and I'll be right back after a quick break. And we're back. Thanks so much for your patience. Like I said, please join us on the open lines if you got something to share. We have 10 people here already, so I think we'll have to have one poem apiece, or maybe two really short, like micro poems or something like that. Definitely a 2-page max, something like that. But to share something if you'd like. Now, the prompt for this week was to, right here, write a poem using a word list. Read part of a book and write down a list of 10 words that stand out most. Use those 10 words to inspire your poem. That was the prompt that was given by last week's guest, Deanna Riley, sort of unwittingly or something. We were talking about the way she writes, and this is the way she writes, by making lists like this. Not always, but sometimes she writes by making lists and then using lists to inspire poems and push poems forward. And it's one of those examples of the way that your mind, your conscious mind, can be preoccupied by something that lets the unconscious take over. And so I did the same thing. I did that with the John Brehm's book. So as I was reading John Brehm's book, I went through and wrote down some words till I got up to 10, and then went on a hike with the kids again, and came back when my mind kind of fresh from John's writing, so it wouldn't just be copying where he went with the words. And then I did my own thing, and here is my poem for this week. This is called The List. I was marching off, but there it was, the angel of happiness, perched on a handrail outside the old community bank, now called a business park. Another word, it seemed, for parking lot, where rows of cars would park a lot, in all their shades of gray. It was all the rage, this kind of rainbow. It was all the rage, this kind of life. I had to stop, and who wouldn't stop in that puddle? The loud curtains of last night's rain slowly filling their favorite shoes. The angel chirped and squawked its wisdom, as angels often do, as if knowledge itself was a kind of nut it chewed. In fact, it nearly looked exactly like the squirrel it might have been, its matted fur a kind of rainbow, too. Of course, I thanked it before marching off, my 2 sponges called socks squishing against the weight of the pavement, a new plan to put a plan in my pocket, already folded neatly in my pocket. So that was the list. My prompt poem for this week. Let's see what you have, and let's go first to let's go to Katie Dozier, because Katie was the last guest on last week. Let's go to Katie first this week. Hey, Katie, how you doing today?
Good. That was a great poem, and I loved the interview.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a fun one. I didn't know anything about John Brehm, as I usually don't of the guests, and it turned out that we had a lot in common, and I really loved his book. So it was always fun to find.
Yeah, I
Yeah.
went in a different direction with the book that I chose to pick from. But I did do the prompt, so this is a prompt poem. And this was inspired because I have gotten into reading poetry with my 5-year-old, and we were reading Where the Sidewalk Ends because I loved all the Shel Silverstein stuff when I was little. And it's really exciting to see her get into poetry and really connect with it.
Hmm.
So I picked my words from there, which is like a little challenging. And I think the words that were chosen from Shel Silverstein will be fairly obvious as I read it. So
Okay, well, let's hear it. This is Ode to Bippity Bim.
yeah, always great to start out not able to pronounce the title as I'm doing my own poem, but I'll try my best. Okay. Ode to Bappity Bim for Shel Silverstein. God bless you for writing words like sneezes, cats and rats and elephants. You make handstands on the very grass the others rake for typos, and scared the bejesus out of my mom's wallet back at the book fair, where boa constrictors snuck skinny-tongued sips of lemonade, and we never found the elephant that stole my peanut butter sandwich. Trumpeting along on an exclamation mark of a tricycle, the crickets no longer chirped because instead they dared to warble, and at the playground, not mulch, but a sea of sprinkles. I laid down, my mouth a tumbler for your raining words, the path back, a sidewalk that, it turns out, never ends.
Ah, that was great. That was gonna scroll the screen. Oh, to Bappity Bim, Bappity Bim. Yeah, and
I said it
definitely,
wrong.
yeah, the Shel Silverstein influence. You could hear it in the voice too. Thanks for sharing that, Katie. Always a pleasure.
Thanks so much.
Yep.
Thanks.
Take care.
Bye.
It was Katie Dozier with Ode to Bappity Bim. Let's go next to T.R. Paulson.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, TR, how you doing tonight?
Good. Rare Monday off.
Yeah, that's great. Maybe after the busy rush, I can't even believe how much, like, how many hours a week did you work? Did you work a ton extra because of the holidays?
Yes and no. I mean, we hired so many seasonal workers that there wasn't a lot of hours, but it was 6 days a week. And I mean, it is what it is. Merry Christmas, everyone.
Yeah, Merry Christmas to you too.
I'm a UPS driver for those
Yeah,
that don't know.
I should have clarified that exactly. So what do you want to share? I think we do have to do one poem. Well, there's sonnets, right? They're short. We could do both, I think.
Yeah, it's a sonnet and a short ghazal.
Yeah, I think we could do both. They're both like half page. Yeah. So what do you want to share first?
I will do. I'll do the ghazal first.
Okay.
It's in Blue Unicorn, and it has a long story behind it. I wrote the first version of it way back in 2001, and this is a spin-off of it. The first version was sort of a really rhymey Dr. Seuss type poem. And there's a long story behind it, and I know we don't have a lot of time, so I'll just read the poem.
Okay.
And I don't know which one you're sharing on screen. Are you scared? It may be a different version because I'm doing different, because the Word version I sent you is different than the published version. I'm going to read the published version, but the Word version is the current version that I'm trying to play with for my manuscript, and everything is confusing and messy. So if it doesn't quite agree with what's on screen,
okay, I'll show the print the published version.
the Word version.
Yeah.
Okay, so it won't quite agree with the published version. Published version is titled "You Can't Tell the Wind Not to Blow." The paper fluttered between us. I didn't hear his reply in the wind. It was only a drawing, a morning glory tossed and defied in the wind. On the farm, they were weeds, those trumpet-shaped flowers, white, laced with faint lines of pink. They would hide in the wind. Those crop dusters swooped like birds of prey until the breeze came. They flew away after dropping white markers to dry in the wind. In the storm, our frost-covered cows tossed their heads to fling dry alfalfa leaves from their mouths in a cloud to my eyes in the wind. The tractor sputtered to life. My father hooked up the blade, and we plowed, and snow swirled to the roadside in the wind. Some people are lost pages from books. Some are dust or flags, fluttering leaves or the snow. Some are sails that fly in the wind. My friend took the page from my hand and looked at it again. Look, T, he said, you missed the one who walked by in the wind.
That was great. That was "You Can't Tell the Wind Not to Blow." And then I guess I want to do both poems and move on, but I want to ask, what's the difference between the two? Like, how is the book, it's definitely a totally different title in the, so what is it that why does the book have a different sort of version of the poem?
Well, because my editor, it goes back to the conversation today, actually. Mm-hmm. My editor told me made the comment, well, your poems are really good poems, but they all read like prompt poems. You need to think about how they fit together and tell a story in an arc in the manuscript. So I tweaked some titles and sort of tried to make my speaker more consistent. And so that's the tweaking. And one of the themes in my manuscript is the idea of unrequited love.
Mm-hmm. Gotcha. Perfect. Well,
so the title worked better.
Mm-hmm. Excellent. And then let's hear the other one too, the sonnet.
And this one I'm super proud of. It's in Best New Poets, and it was originally an anthology put together called Poets Speaking to Poets, Poets Speaking to Poets, Echoes and Tributes. I don't have that version in front of me because I'm so excited about the
congratulations. That's awesome.
Poets.
Yeah.
And so yeah, it sort of got life twice.
Yeah, that's always great. Let's hear it.
And it too is a prompt poem. It's after Richard Hugo's book, The Treasuring Town, which I think most of us have read and enjoyed, and which I highly recommend to anybody who hasn't read it and enjoyed it. Birds never nest here. You've never heard of my town. It straddles Forgotten River, where the main street trestle, now broken, once crossed. Now a ferry paddles back and forth Sundays. On the west side stands the butcher shop. The tenderest meats. On the east, his wife picks grapes and cherries, bakes pies to feed her other lover, a concrete mixer. We pray at dinner here. Barges carry guests of every faith to downtown docks. We put down pillows and towels in spare guest rooms, serve pancakes and the ancient books. We pray. Those who don't repent just disappear. It's a mystery where the butcher finds his prey. The nearest ranch, 400 miles away.
That's great. As always, wonderful formal poems. Thanks so much, TR, for sharing those. And congrats on the book you're working on.
Well, congrats will be due when I actually find
I'm sure you will. I'm sure you will. Yeah, but I'm glad you're putting one together finally. Thanks so much, TR.
Yeah, good to pop in and say hello.
Yeah, glad to see you. Okay. There's T.R. Paulson with 2 poems. Let's go next to Spartacus, because he's somewhere. It's very late wherever he is. I'm not sure where. Sometimes he's in Greece, sometimes he's in the UK, sometimes he's traveling. But Spartacus, are you there?
Hi.
Hey, Spartacus, how you doing?
I'm doing well. Happy holidays, everyone.
Yeah, happy holidays to you. And where are you calling from tonight?
I have moved to Cyprus. So different place, more sunny.
Excellent. Yeah, good idea being down there right now. And let me see if I can find your poem. What do you have to share with us?
I've got a prompt poem, a robin balances on roses.
Excellent. Let me put it in a Word doc really quickly, and then we'll pop it up on screen. So this was the prompt poem. What was the source material for it?
I used some poems from Kavafis, and I just have chosen some words that they stood out.
Excellent. Yeah, let's hear it. Go ahead whenever you're ready.
The poem is called Voices. So, when a robin balances on roses, every night I need to decide where I should go. I write names of places on small pieces of paper. I put them inside my hat. Then I choose one and I hope that I made the right choice. A guilty mind is always suspicious. How many dreams, how many nightmares, how many thoughts, how many voices Gathered together, I am gathering my ideal household items, like an ant before I move again. Pots and kettles, beloved poets and suitcases on the go. Outside, the wind speaks his mind. The palm trees, with their tangled hair, can hear the music. The moon, a circle, a dot, a full stop, for every new sentence, every night.
Yeah, excellent. Great poem. That was When a Robin Balances on Roses by Spartacus et Ignastris. Great to have you on again. It's been a while. I know the timing isn't great. What time is it there?
4:30 in the morning.
There you go. Are you staying up late or did you wake up early?
I wake up early and it's holidays now. So more time for myself.
Oh, glad to hear that. Yeah, thanks so much. Always great to see you, Spartacus.
Thanks, Tim.
Yep.
Nice to see you again.
Yep, take care. Yeah, it was Spartacus with When a Robin Balances on Roses. Let's go next to Mark Grenier.
Hi, Tim. How's it going?
Hey, Mark. Good. How you doing tonight?
Oh, not bad. I thought these are not prompt poems. These are just poems that I happen to have written recently.
Okay, yeah, they're two, but they're short, so feel free to read both of them. So,
Okay.
anything you want to say about either?
No, not really. They're just what they are.
Okay, well, let's hear it. Go ahead.
Okay, Jacaranda. Jacaranda petals scattered on the ground, some keeping their color, some gone gray-brown. Two-colored path on concrete or clay, mortality's emblem, the end of a day.
Excellent. Yeah, I love the rhymes there. Thanks for sharing that. Jacaranda. That was beautiful. We have a lot of them by the office in Rattleland. There's a whole street full of jacaranda trees.
Yeah, there's a lot of them around Southern California, so now I can't seem to open the other one. Let me see. Let me try another place. Okay, and the other poem is Emergence, and this is a shaped poem. It's based on my poor garden. The green hornworms have stripped the leaves, and my tomato plant stems are a leafless dream. The winter leaves are dry twigginess here, there, while on the ground brown pupas change until wings unfurl into moonlit sky. As spring comes in, new eggs are laid, and tomato plants raise their banquet leaves for hornworm greed to fatten up on. I'm almost afraid to accept that change, from chrysalis to eating leaves, from locked alone in the darkness there to making more new eaters to share. Darkness suggests what cannot be changed, while appetites bring lost dreams to days.
Oh, excellent. Great sounds as always. Thanks for sharing that Emergence, Mark Grenier. Thanks so much, Mark.
Thanks.
Yep, have a good night. Yeah, two poems by Mark Grenier. Next up, let's go to Karen Marker.
Hello.
Hey, Karen, how you doing tonight?
Good. I'm responding to, I love the talk tonight and this idea that a poem needs an audience, and it's I'm being brave to put myself out tonight.
Yeah, that might have been the best. It was a tough question. If you didn't have an answer, you'd already thought about it. It'd be tough to answer that. And I thought he could take it, and then he did. That was one of the best answers to a tough question we've had on here, I think, because it's a poem needs an audience.
Yeah, and it's wonderful because here we are. Thank you.
Yeah. Well, thanks for being here to everybody watching too, because we need you, even if you're not sharing poems. We need you listening.
So this poem was written to a Mary Oliver prompt from her poem called Good Morning, and it's about the fact that we need to be dazzled by at least 10 things every day. Good morning again. My mother died on December 10th, and 17 years later, what I remember are the little hooded things, the jack in the pulpits and their quiet sermons. How still we must be to hear them, and the sparrows and the ferns, all that's hidden in the forest under the bark and broken branches. The fungus growing, the mushrooms popping up everywhere after the rain, how it looks at the edge of seasons, most of all in these shorter days between fall and winter, the luminescent liminal moment right after the sun sets, the lingering light I learned from her to see and be dazzled by, all that lives right here on my street, the magnolia tree that's given up almost all its leaves and is not yet budding, the wonder that comes when my body walks out the door this morning into the world, holding everything she named and taught me to love.
Oh, that was great. Thanks so much for sharing that. Good morning again. That was Karen Marker. And it's just wonderful. We have so many. The open lines here must be the best open lines anywhere. When we had a live reading series, I always felt that way too. People, we just have great poems. Thanks so much for sharing that, Karen. Always a pleasure. Karen Marker with Good Morning again. Next, let's go to Alan Harvey.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Alan, good to see you again. And it's nice you got the Tacoma, Washington, too. I like knowing where people are. It's really fun. Thanks for having that. So what do you have you'd like to share?
Actually, the title's probably self-explanatory, but I had made a word list, but when I started writing, it became a narrative. So only a couple of my words got into it.
Yeah, well, if that's what Dion does all the time too. She'll only use one of the words maybe, and it'll just trigger off some flight of imagination. So that's perfect.
Well, and so this comes from news of last week.
Okay.
So, Immaculate Reception. A mere mortal was transformed into a god on December 23rd, 1972. His life played out on the Elysian Fields, ending on December 20th, 2022. Penn State football was worshipped on autumn afternoons in the Keystone State. Sundays were reserved for suit and tie church, but Saturdays were reserved for college game day radio. The Nittany Lions already had a god in the form of Joe Paterno. This was before he became a fallen hero. They had a starting backfield of Lydell Mitchell and Franco Harris. Both went on to star in the NFL. Franco went to the hard-working steel city of Pittsburgh in western Pennsylvania and grew into the god he died as. When the hated Oakland Raiders came to town, the game was close, with time running out. 4th down, 22 seconds left. Pittsburgh had to score. Bradshaw's pass bounced off the collision between receiver and defensive back, traveling many yards through the air. The season appeared to be over, but then divine providence intervened. Heading to the ball, Franco came out of nowhere, reaching down to within inches of the turf. This glorious warrior snagged the ball and clambered on. Shucking off a tackler, Franco lumbered into the end zone for a final winning score of 13-7. But even more important to a 15-year-old boy, a god was born on that Sunday afternoon. Unlike the Greek gods who loved interfering in human affairs, Franco used his divinity for good. And that boy no longer worships gridiron gods, but still reveres them when one dies.
Oh, thanks so much for sharing that. I didn't even know Franco Harris had died. That's too bad to hear. But yeah,
last week.
I didn't know, but great to share. There's not enough sports poems out there, and I wonder how many people watching have seen the Immaculate Reception. I don't know what the percentage of poets who are football fans, but I wonder. I mean, you should go look it up on YouTube if you haven't. That was a crazy play.
It was chosen the best play in NFL history.
Yeah, it's the most surprising for sure. Yeah, thanks for sharing that, Alan. That was great.
Thank you.
Yep, take care. It was Alan Harvey with Immaculate Reception. Let's go next to Carla Schwartz.
Hi. What a great night.
Yeah,
here.
great night of poetry. Thanks for joining us, Carla. What did you like to share?
Okay, so I have two poems. They're very short, but I'm going to start with my prompt poem.
Okay.
I have the word basket down at the bottom of the poem, and it's called Remembering My Mother on Her Birthday While Riding to the Grocery Store.
Excellent. And what poem is it? What's it written?
So I went to the Poetry Foundation website, and I just looked up a bunch of Diane Seuss poems, and I just got, I got a number of words that I pulled from there, and I have the list.
Yeah, there you go at the bottom. Yeah, excellent. Okay, let's hear it.
Okay. Remembering my mother on her birthday while riding to the grocery store. A day not too warm for northern December. The wind pinches my face with its fingertips. The secret of not freezing is to keep moving. The superfluity of celebrating a birthday after death. Tears slip from my cheek to my tongue, rivulets of tristesse carved into my wet skin. I roll down our driveway past the dried scat flecked with hay, the miniature loaves stacked innocently, some flamboyant coyote marking its trail. I pedal to the grocery to beat my exhaustion to disappear, to pick up some beets. I ride to the grocery in defiance, waiting for no, baking it, the opposite of grief.
Oh, excellent poem, Carla. That was great. Remembering my mother on her birthday while riding to the grocery store. Great poem. And then you have another short one, too, that you wanted to share as well.
I thought, I told last time, or one of those times, I had a poem that appeared on The Inquisitive Eater. I actually had two poems, and I read Applesauce. So I sent you a link, I believe, to the other one.
Yeah, I have it
to the
right
both
here.
again.
Yeah.
Okay, rhubarb.
Okay.
To check on your rhubarb, I tuck my sharp knife, double wrapped in plastic bags, under the bungee of my paddleboard and head out to your dock. Summer is soup right now, hot, viscous. I find the rhubarb, great stalks, as thick as my wrist, long as my thighs. I pull out my knife to make the clean cuts. I know why I cannot restrain myself. I've had your rhubarb on my mind ever since last summer. Your gift, so large, so plentiful. Don't think I'm crazy talking to a dead man. Don't think I'm stealing what would go to waste. I'm hoping I honor your life to taste the sour in a pie.
Another great one. That was rhubarb. Thanks so much for sharing that, Carla.
You are welcome, and thank you for this wonderful night of poetry.
Yeah, always my pleasure. And that was from The Inquisitive Eater, which is still, I think, a really interesting magazine, inquisitiveeater.com, new school food. Fascinating, just what people have and how much opportunities to publish are out there in interesting ways. Thanks for sharing that, Carla.
Nighty night.
Yep, good night. Okay, let's go next to Bishwajit Mishra.
Hi, team.
Hey, how you doing today?
Okay. No, I'm good. Thank you. And Merry Christmas and Happy Holidays to all. It was a wonderful interview. And this is the first time I ever watched a full interview live.
Great. Well, I'm glad you could.
Reasons, yeah, so I really enjoyed it. And like coincidence, I've got kids at home with a dog and the reno going on. So I came to the bedroom sitting cross-legged and I watched gentlemen talking about Buddhism, spiritualism, and ego.
Oh, that
so
is
I
perfect.
that out.
Excellent. Yeah, I can't beat that.
Okay.
Okay, so you have two. I think you have two short ones too, right?
Yeah, the first one. The second one, the interview motivated it. So I thought I'd take a long shot if I get a chance. The first one is the one I had sent, and I didn't write it based on the prompt, but I thought it's on the same probably pattern like Diana or O'Reilly's poem. So I sent it. It's called Devolution. Space to land, land to animal, animal to man, man to man, soil to paper, people to flags. Critical is flying. must be higher. Comparative to what is a wipeable board? Lions' roars reverberate in smoke homogenized jungles and rebound on the walls. Good for framed pictures, hallowed with wreaths of paper flowers that are almost immortal.
Oh, fascinating poem. Yeah, thanks so much for sharing that. That was devolution. Yeah.
Devolution.
Yeah, thanks for sharing that. And then your second poem is, this isn't too long either. Yeah, so The Advisor too, right?
Yeah, it was written a long time ago. I was waiting for my daughter to pick her up at her college, and I was waiting in the library, and I wrote on that computer. And I was not a regular writer; it just came out of nothing. Mm-hmm. It's one of the fewest rhyming poems, if it can be called that.
Yeah.
The Advisor. I'm so wealthy with the riches overflowing. What do I do with it? Not really knowing. Heavy it is and so very gross. Not sure if this is really green or just some moss. For I know not if there is room with anyone to take some from me, as I brood day and night, never thinking, though, to come out of it free. I sometimes believe there is none as generous as me, who can only give and never take a penny. Oh, give, I sure do, unasked and unsought ever so. If you have not tested my treat, pray come and take it now. Ever ready and willing, I am with my donations day and night. You will not find a provider as willing and ready at sight. Brimming with it to give away, I'm always fluent. Does not matter if for the receiver it turns out affluent. With this wealth ready for distribution, the large me romps like a buffoon. When I don't know, it's just a small me inside a large, empty balloon. Always in the tide, never with an ebb. Oozing out it is to be given with no need to wrap. Oh, if I could find a way to turn its flow inward, that would sure make me move forward and give me the sight to see the beauty as ugliness lies in the eyes of the beholder at the sea. Friends, see how tricky is that little me and how zany, with this poem too, is trying to win points Brownie.
Excellent. Thanks so much for sharing that. The Advisor, Bishwit, excellent poems. Always a pleasure. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, thank you. Good night.
Yep, good night. That was The Advisor, the second poem by Bishwajit Mishra. Let's go next to Stephen Croft.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Stephen. How you doing this evening?
Doing good. I'd like to read a Poets Respond poem. And I feel like it's a downer after the spiritual calm of the featured poet.
Mm-hmm.
But I'm going to take us to current day Afghanistan.
Yeah, which is what we haven't really, it hasn't been in the news much lately. We just kind of ignore, what's going on there too.
Yeah, I still follow it though.
Mm-hmm.
So this is my contributor's note. Yesterday, I wrote this poem about the Taliban's return to public floggings and executions, remembering Zarmina, whose 1999 execution by the Taliban in Kabul's Olympic Stadium played on U.S. news programs, along with the Taliban's destruction of the giant Bamiyan Buddha statues in the run-up to the U.S. invasion of Afghanistan. Today, I read the Taliban has banned university education for women. When I was a soldier in Kabul in 2009 through 10, students would approach us when we were around Kabul University, mostly to practice their English. The young women were bolder than the men in approaching. I am sorry for what has happened to Afghanistan. I was hopeful for the country back then.
Excellent. Now let's hear the poem. Yeah.
Yeah. And the Zarmina, her execution is famous as a still, sort of like Tank Man in Tiananmen Square is famous. The Burning Monk in Saigon, also taken from a still.
Yeah.
Taken as a still from an actual video. This is Ghost of Zarmina, daughter of Ghulam Hasnat. Kindness was the eggshell blue of morning sky over sweep of brown mountains, gathering caraway with laughing children in the summer green valley of fir trees and wildflower, stroking the soft hair of a young goat to give it my joy. Anger was my husband's harsh hiss, cussy as he whipped my arms, my backside numb, and after my daughter killed him was the Talib's harsh hiss, kneel daughter, as he put the barrel to my skull, my life kneeling in its last dust before thousands. Sadness is staring, my tears sliding like rainwater down the window of a 3-room stone house in Coast, as my daughter's husband threatens a pumpkin on a pine wood table, butchers it to pulp, points the dripping cane at her knees and hopeless eyes to the floor. Bitterness is the rules of the Taliban, their hangings, stonings, lashings, cutting off the fingers of young girls for painted nails. Fear of leaving my children was my stadium floor plea to Taliban. Now hope devil Jinn will curse them rustles like dried moths in wind.
Yeah, great ending, especially, and such an important poem that I don't know. I don't see it in the news or in Poets Respond anymore. What's going on in Afghanistan right now after the withdrawal and all that. So thanks for sharing that important poem.
Okay, thank you.
Yep, take care. Yeah, that was Stephen Croft with Ghost of Zarmina, daughter of Ghulam Asnat. And let's go next to Mike Bales.
Good show tonight. It's always nice to throw in a little philosophy.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, thanks for joining. What do you got for us, Mike?
I want to read my prompt poem. I think I sent it to you last Tuesday.
Yeah, Street Talk, right? Talk. Yeah, I got it right here. Yep.
I became friends with this Wisconsin poet. I think she's great. Mary Jo Balistreri, when we were featured readers in Naperville for this one event. And she promotes me pretty well, but she's great. I read her book Still. I'd recommend it to people. There's a spiritual edge to it. It has to do with her life story and her life situation, losing some people she's known. And I took 6 words from her book, from poems in her book Still. This is the poem Street Talk.
Okay, let's hear it.
Most conversations turn to gray sky, hushed winds after a change of weather. Monday, another page of a chapter. A man who lives in alleys and on streets speaks to gargoyles and facades in shadows by gray buildings downtown. He laughs his Hebrew-phrenic laugh, a convocation to his angels and gods. As passers-by say he's crazy, as he listens to a voice no one else can hear. As he listens to a voice, he's crazy. As passers-by say, his angels and gods, a convocation too. He laughs his Hebrew-phrenic laugh. In shadows cast by gray buildings downtown, speaking to gargoyles and facades, a man who lives in alleys and on streets. Monday, another page of another chapter. Hushed winds after a change of weather. Most conversations turn to gray skies. That's a palindrome.
Yeah. Oh, really? Most conversations. Yeah. Which one is a palindrome?
This poem, Street Talk's a palindrome.
Oh, really? Oh, very interesting. Yeah. Thanks so much for sharing that.
Okay, thanks.
Yeah. Thanks, Mike. There's Mike Bales with Street Talk from the prompt. Next up, let's go to Angela Gartner.
Hi, Tim.
Hey, Angela. How you doing tonight?
Good, real good. Hope you had a good holiday.
Yeah, definitely. I hope you did too.
Yeah, it was cold.
Oh, yeah, that's right, because you're in Chicago. What was how low did it get? Do you know?
Well, I mean, I'm in Ohio.
Oh, you're
actually.
in Ohio. Oh, okay.
That's okay. But yeah, it was what the wind chill was -25, so fun times.
Where in Ohio are you? I really thought you were in Chicago.
No, I'm in like Northeast Ohio.
Oh,
So
gotcha.
near Cleveland, yeah.
Oh, okay.
So,
Oh, okay. And
yeah.
so what do you have to share with us tonight?
Well, actually, I was gonna share my poem I had, but it's been cold, and I sent you. If Old Man Winter told me a secret, I wouldn't remember it next summer, and I revised it, so I emailed it to you.
Yeah, I have it right here. Yeah. Okay.
Yeah, it's about being cold, because I feel this year, I don't know, it just felt like it got darker earlier, and it got colder earlier. But hopefully that won't last. But
yeah, and the days are finally getting longer too. So today was a little bit brighter than yesterday, and that'll be the case for a while.
Yeah, it will get a little, because the solstice like that, they got a little lighter, and but I'm just I just don't like the dark this year, so I just want it to be lighter.
Yeah,
so.
me too. Okay, let's hear it.
Sour milk wash is on the skies. He's here to shorten my days. The other side where sun shines, he's in the mountains waiting to spray film from his inhaler. It's mid-spring sweater weather. He stands in the snow, his long, thin body in a mammoth coat. I think about his gaunt eyes as his blue fingers are tapping on his phone's weather app to tell us about icy droplets. He will stay in my backyard until he dips into the corners of spring rains. The birds sing when he melts in the shadow puppets of the trees. He then hides until the falling leaves. As the sun reaches its northernmost point, I forget his frigidity.
Oh, excellent. Yeah, definitely. Is it warming up? Because here, the jet stream is like, it's that looping jet stream, and we hiked, and it was like shorts and a t-shirt, and we were hiking over snowbanks, but it was very nice. And I think the high was 65. Are you gonna get that anytime soon?
Well, it's gonna be in the 51 at the end of the week.
Well, that'll
so
feel
it
good.
is
Yeah.
I mean, it's gonna warm up, but it will get cold again in January. It just, we go through these spells where it gets really cold, and then it melts everything, and then gets cold again. So.
Yeah, exactly. Well, take care. Stay warm, Angela. Always good to see you.
Good to see you. Have a great night.
Yep, you too. Angela Gartner with "If Old Man Winter Told Me a Secret, I Wouldn't Remember It Next Summer." And let's see. Let's go to Lucy Chow. A couple more people left on the lines.
Hello, can you hear me?
I can. How you doing today, Lucy?
Good. It's late morning here in China.
Okay. Yeah, great. I'm so glad you could call in from China. And what is it that you'd like to share?
I sent a prompt poem, and I'm going to read a little note on it. In the spirit of Christmas and the word list, I am trying something daring in this poem, figuring the Virgin Mary as both the ordinary woman of Bethlehem that Christianity believes her to be, and an kind of earth goddess whose body and clothes and articles in her living environment merges with plants named after her holy epithet, Our Lady, and is able to give birth to the reddest rose of the world, that is Jesus Christ, whose blood upon the cross is to purge the world of sin. So this vegetal image is to be found in the visions of medieval Christian mystics, such as Saint Hildegard of Bingen. So I present the plant names, the list of plant names in the right version of the poem. I do not stick strictly to 10, but you can see that it's a list.
Yeah, excellent.
Our Lady, the Virgin, waits for her child in her garden. She kneels, praying, her fingers touched, her praying mat teaching her pain that goes in the world. The yellow prickly heads and sharp barbed shins of the tall grasses sacrifice to the comfort of her head at night. The sticky, acrid room that teems her soft downed, green, pointed fingers, pain, physiques, the body and the soul. So much the flower now latent in her womb shall bloom to teach the world to know its passion of sorrow. She stands by the road, by her rude house, the rough grass tufts of her rustic garden. Their wiry strength, bearing the brunt of the burly wind like her wafted hair. She awaits the wayfarers. Through the day, the wind, high, sunny, lifts her and the earth's hair. A strand of her tresses, red as
Oh, it sounds like she dropped out. Lucy, are you there? I think I'll finish the poem for you, Lucy. That happened before too. We'll put you back. Okay. She awaits the wayfarers through the day. The wind high, sunny lifts her, and the earth's hair. A strand of her tresses, red as her fine blood, wound round her finger, like the wise man's way. Small orchid blooms that way. She prints buckwheat with her purple thumb. She combs her hair in the wayfaring wind. The comb's teeth fall to the earth as seeds. The brown gleam off a fly-trapped seed. Limbs transformed, her eyes beam. When Gabriel spoke in her garden, she dropped her thimble under his wings, took root, lifted its mouth to heaven. It bloomed heaven's own most blue. Her joyous tears trickled to poke pinks awake in a gravelly crack. To purple-pink seals hung on a green arch, she cried, "Who am I? Who am I, chosen to bear him? How come you bear on your little crowns my unworthy name?" When her husband dreamed of the angel, she dreamed becoming the fertile earth herself. Her purple slippers abuzz with bees frisking their ribbon grass laces. Weaving around her ribbon grass garters, her smock a meadow of crucifer stars, refulgently white. Her mantle fabric of a golden mist, of miniature roses, round heart fronds, fluted and flounced, asperged with dew from the sacred font, her small celandine earrings chiming in the scented winds of perennial spring. She was a green mass smelling of asphodel. She knew she would soon burn and bloom, with blood and blaze imbruing the earth, the birth of the rose of the world, to bless the earth. The red blossom of divine light advents her womb this midnight. Very interesting, fascinating use of the form. Thanks so much. That was Lucy Chow. Sorry I had to finish that off for her. Lucy's in China, of course, and the connection. It's a miracle that we can have people calling in from all the way around the world. And so when it doesn't work, we should understand that sometimes that the miracle of that technology doesn't always work. But great to have you on, Lucy. Next up, let's go to Richard Westheimer.
Hey, Tim.
Hey, Richard. How you doing tonight?
Well, I'm kind of upset. I broke my string.
Uh-oh.
I have listened straight through to every Rattlecast, every one since May of 2020.
2020. Wow. That is some string.
I came on my first one, and a lot of it was I had nothing else to do during COVID.
Yeah.
But just made it appointment work, and I missed it, and it looked fabulous.
Yeah, it was a good one. So you get the experience of watching it back on replay at least.
Yeah. So I'm happy to join. I'm happy I got to hear open lines too.
Yeah, but you rushed in so fast you didn't even take your coat off.
Yeah, well, I've had my wife drive home because she drives faster.
Really? Oh, that's great. So let's hear. I think let's just do. You have two poems. You can do both if you want. We're kind of.
Well, that your call. I'll read the cat poem, and then if you think there's time,
I think there's only Brent left, and then so that's good. Yeah, go ahead with both.
Okay. And I didn't do this week's prompt poem, but I probably have never shared this with you, but my Rattle Poetry Prize finalist poem was a pick a list.
Oh, really? Oh, very interesting. I didn't know that. And is that a prompt you heard from somebody, or is that just, how did you know about that?
You.
Me?
Yeah. You had us go to random word generator.
Oh, okay. Oh, that's right. Yeah, we've done so much stuff that I just forget.
Yeah, well, sure. And I picked 14 words, and I think I each one in a line of a sonnet. So.
Oh, wow, that's great. Oh, wow. Yeah, that's the way that we were talking about, the way prompts inspire the unconscious to emerge and flower, and that's a great example of how it can work.
That's exactly it. You know, the pick a word and you start going, and you have to fit the other ones in, and it was magic.
Yeah. All right, well, go ahead with this. The cat lost in a storm.
Okay. The cat lost in the storm is a cat lost in a storm. The cat I don't like much slipped out this morning. It was 30 below if you count wind chill. If you don't, you've never been out in it, scraping ice off the blacktop, shoveling snow from the walk, watching the wind pick up and drift a new blanket over your work, making new work, which you're happy to do while shouting the cat's name, Simmy. You'll search in all the places he sleeps most days, the tool shed, the corner of the porch, the perch in the workshop. You're shaking a plastic bin full of his kibble. By now, you're crying a bit, missing him, thinking of him at your feet under your desk, his purr sneaking its way into a line of a poem, missing even that annoying mew, 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 mew he makes when he's bored or hungry before dark. Deb goes out to look one last time, even though she thinks he's dead. She sees Simmy darting under the barn. She comes back to the house, announces the good news of the season. I grab the kibble, throw on a few layers, and follow Deb and hear the mew, mew, mew. I shake the food container, talk to him nicer than he's ever heard from me. Sim Sim pokes his head out to see, and I pounce like I've seen him do, wrap his shaking body in my arms and traipse through drifts back to the house. Was crying then, I'm crying as I write, and I think I might actually like that cat. For now.
That is great. And I can definitely relate to that experience. Same thing happened to me with our cat, which I never really got along with, Dante. And but he came back. We got him. And
he came back, and I think I will like him for a few days.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, Dante was mean. I don't know. We didn't get along, but I still was sad when he got out.
It's like you're responsible for this.
Yeah.
So the other one was the color poem from last week.
Okay.
Currently titled Brown 1957, although I was cautioned by somebody that somebody might think that's Brown v. Board of Education.
Oh, yeah.
So I'll probably have to retitle it. Brown, Mary told me, is the color of royalty. Brown, she said, is the color of your beautiful eyes and the bark of trees. She leaned over the zinc laundry basin, scrubbing the collars of my father's dress shirts. I sat where she always put me, snugged in the half-full clothes hamper beneath the stairs, and plied her with questions. Why did she wear a blue and yellow robe to our house? Why did she change into the gray uniform when she arrived? Why was her skin the color of coffee? And she told me, her mouth full of her mama's Alabama drawl, that she was a queen and her man Kent a king of all Africa. She told me more stories of her kin, of how they all lived in palaces trimmed in the same gold, under skies blazed with the same blue as her dashiki, how Kent's old panel truck was painted to remind them of the savannah, and of carriages her people rode in before times. Before what? I asked, and she stopped her scrubbing, turned to face me, and in a low voice, like it was meant to be a secret, said, now that's a question you should ask your mother.
Great ending to that poem. Brown, 1957, called for now. Thanks so much for sharing that, Dick. Excellent as always, and great to see you. I was a little worried when you weren't appearing on. I was like, oh no, is Dick sick or what's going on? So I'm glad you got on, and good to see you tonight.
Good to see you too.
Yep.
Bye-bye.
Yep. Take care. There's a Dick Westheimer with 2 poems. And here comes Brent Stauffer leading up the anchor man in our bowling league.
Hey, Tim, how's it going?
Good. How you doing, Brett?
Oh, I'm great. I wish that I didn't have to follow Dick. It's always a tall order.
Yeah,
I'll come right after Dick.
Definitely is, but you live up to it. You live up to it. So let's see what do you got for us?
Well, I got a poem that puts the rough in rough draft, but it's a list poem. Although you wouldn't be able to tell, but I guess that's part of the way this one plays out. It's I got the words from Zagajewski, his book Mysticism for Beginners. And so that's probably all you need to know about it. I'll just go ahead.
Yeah, let's hear it.
For Zagajewski. I just found out today that's kind of, I mean, I'm sure I'm doing it wrong, but that's kind of how you say his name.
Oh, yeah.
I always said Zagajewski, but that's not it at all.
Yeah, there's somebody who had a tweet that went viral. That was like how to pronounce like 4 different poets that we love names, and it was completely wrong for everyone. So you're not alone.
Like Milosh, I'd probably get that wrong.
Exactly. Yep.
But,
yep.
But at least we all know who I mean.
We do.
You know?
We definitely do.
Okay, here we go for Zagajewski. Now you are counted among the dead. I carry a handful of chrysanthemum flowers through the darkness. When I lay my head on the track, I can feel the hum of a rushing train, but don't know if it's coming or going. The world is an empty shell, washed up on black sand, each room in it twice the size of the last, and lacking echoes. I've never been to Krakow or Gdansk, and don't speak a word of Polish. Well, maybe one, Solidarność, though I'm sure I say it poorly. The raven on the white rooftop shrugs his onyx shoulders from despair or indifference. Only you can tell us. Where have you gone, endlessly restless emigre, into what immortal nowhere? This poem is a nautilus shell, bursting with flowers, hurtling down tracks of darkness. Now you are counted among the dead.
Great tribute poem. Yeah, excellent poem for Zaga. I don't even know how to say it. Now that you've said it.
Adam.
There you go. We'll call him Adam.
We're such good friends. Me and Adam.
Yeah, well, it feels like that when you read their poems, for sure. Thanks so much for sharing that, Brent. Always a pleasure. Great to see you out there.
Tim.
Yep.
Thanks, everybody.
Yep, take care. There's Brent Stauffer. And let's really quickly see what else we've got on the email list. I have a few minutes to do a few poems, maybe. Let's see. So Nivedita Karthik is here. She couldn't have a chance to record audio like she often does. But let's look at her poem. I'll throw it up into the Word doc here. And as Nivi says, let's see, the book I chose is Snow Country by Yasunari Kawabata. This novel, the short novel, is a beautiful read for its prose that reads like beautiful haiku. I chose 11 words, phrases from this book, and penned this poem. And here we go. This is is it titled? I think it's untitled. Let's hear it. This is Nivedita Karthik. Let's see. There we go. Okay. Effort flows within me, roaring like the rain superimposed on the void till it shines brightly like the Milky Way, which, like the great aurora it is, shrouds me as I stand at the edge of the earth where only women can rally, or only women really can, where I am the blue icy blade of the moon, where I am the stars that swiftly ascend into the evening, dispelling the quiet, chilly loneliness I was before. Oh, those great last 3 lines are great. Thanks for sharing that, Nivi. That was and you can see the if you're watching on not listening, you can see she bolded the words that were taken from there, and great weaving between them. Thanks for sharing that, Nivi. Let's see what else we've got. Let's see. So here we've got Kimberly McNeil's got a poem here. This is The Day Christmas Died. So let's check this one out. The Day Christmas Died. Let me put it in a doc and make it a little bigger font for us. Okay, The Day Christmas Died. This is Kimberly McNeil. Garish holiday decorations choked the great room of my brother's new house. Cluttered gifts were stacked high enough to block the floor-to-ceiling windows and form a trail which snaked across the floor. The room's darkness divided by thin beams of afternoon light, which entered through tiny cracks between the stacked packages. On Christmas morning, their mountain of gifts proved too great a task for my son's cousins to open. Already saturated by stuff they neither needed or wanted, the cousins suddenly announced they were sick of opening presents and left the room to find new entertainment. The shocking display puzzled my son, who began protesting, leaving the unopened presents behind. A Christmas introduction to gluttony and greed, where he quickly learned he began to believe that he never had enough, that he needed more, oblivious to his transformation into an entitled bore. The Day Christmas Died. That was The Day Christmas Died by Kimberly McNeil. Thanks. I think a lot of us can relate to that. Over commercialization of the holiday. Thanks for sharing that, Kimberly. I think, let's see. We've got one more. This is Brian O'Sullivan. And let's check this one out. This is another prompt poem. Oops. There we go. This is Brian O'Sullivan. He says, My word list was generated by a word cloud program when I pasted in about a week's worth of daily poems from Rattle. That's interesting. The words were orphan, I, problem, man, hand, mother, sympathy, parent, and woman. And his poem here by Brian O'Sullivan, Smiles at a Funeral. A man stood at the front of his childhood church. At 51, he was newly orphaned. His voice came haltingly and his face flushed hard, though the pews were filled sparely and mostly with family. He spoke of how when his brother at restaurants would glare at him to hurry and catch up and finish eating so they could leave, his mother somehow always had a little more coffee to finish. So it wasn't his fault. Problem solved. In the front pew, his brother, no longer a flame-haired fiend, laughed with his eyes, with a glint of their mother's empathy, and the smiling eyes of the woman whom the man loved made a beacon, so that though his face was still flushing, he went on. He recalled his mother's solution to the problem of belief. When he'd asked, Do you believe in leprechauns? He had said, I'd like to believe. And when he'd asked, Do you believe in Uri Geller? She had said, I'd like to believe. And when he had asked, Do you believe in dinosaurs? She smiled but didn't laugh and said, I'd like to believe, dear. When he said she'd showed him that sometimes wanting to believe is enough, the priest surprised him by catching his eye and smiling, encouraging him to go on to say that he wanted to believe that somewhere a woman was standing in front of her door, fumbling with her keys, and pale. Her little Shih Tzu came running up to her, and behind the dog came her husband with a surprisingly robust head of hair flowing behind him, and he took her hand, and the man's parents were happy. This he wanted to believe, and this, for a moment at least, he did believe. Outside the church, through the gray clouds, a sunlight smile breaks. And that last bit was a haiku. So this is an interesting Hyman. Thanks for sharing that. Once again, Smiles at a Funeral by Brian O'Sullivan. Thanks, Brian, for sharing that prompt poem. And I do believe that is it for this. Let's see. Yeah, do believe this is it for this week. Oh, here's a quick one, too. This is why Carlton Johnson popped up on the Zoom, and then he had to disappear. This is the earliest color prompt, and it's Today in Blue. So let me read Carlton Johnson's poem, too. Today in Blue. Again, we'll make it big enough so everyone can see it, and then we'll dive in. Today in Blue. It's a prose poem. For those just listening, here we go. Today in Blue. Let me do this. Move it down. All right. Oops. There we go. Editing your poem here, Carlton. Okay, today in blue. Today the prompt was earliest color memory. I don't have an earliest color memory. What is a memory? What is a thought? What is a permutation? I consider my earliest memories growing up in Cleveland, Ohio, where winters were staged in terminal whiteness as truckloads of white snow were heaped onto our home on Edge Hill Road. I can recall the spontaneous joy the dropping of flakes brought to my young heart. I recall getting suited up with boots, the kind that buckle, a warm snow outfit and knit gloves so I could go galumphing out in the rich, heavenly, marshmallowy, frothy whiteness to build a snowman or make a snow fort. I recall going out with my sister, who was 2.5 years younger, in an equal hermetically sealed outfit. I think hers was white and mine was blue, but life was fun back in the day when all the worries vanished with the next snow melt. That is great. It takes me back to Rochester, New York, very much like Cleveland, Ohio. Thanks for sharing that, Carlton. Always a pleasure. Always happy to read if you try and make it and can't. Let's see. And here, actually, one late addition, too. Here's a Hospital Green. This is Steve Horrell. And if you're wondering why color poems are coming up, that was last week's prompt. The earliest color you can remember was the prompt. So here's Steve Horrell, who just 1 minute ago sent this poem. It asked me to read it for him. This is Hospital Green. Oops, wrong one. There we go. Hospital Green. First thing you notice, entering the children's ward lined with bile green walls, what we ever after called Hospital Green, already enough to make you sick. First hospital stay, 11 years old, appendix removal, nice big scar. First night after the operation, everything so strange, bed firm, crisp, clean, but smelling weird. Odd rumbling building noises, machine fans clicking on, off. Waking, night, a woman screaming, no, 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 and sobbing in the hallway just outside the room. Nurses trying to calm her so as not to wake every child on the ward. Too late for that. Her son just died, in a bed just like mine. I cried for me, for him, Hospital Green hemming me in. Yeah, poignant memory there, Hospital Green. Thanks so much for sharing that, Steve. Steve Horrell. And that is going to be the show for today. Let's do the Sciku really quickly. And the Sciku for this week is right here. I don't remember. I did this earlier. Usually I do it like the night before. And this time I did it a few days before. And trying to get a little ahead of time with the holidays. This is the prompt, or what triggered this poem for me. And here we go. Let me kind of clear out the thing so maybe we can see it. Yeah. There we go. That's a little better. Scientists find key reason why loss of smell occurs in long COVID-19. And the reason some people fail to recover their sense of smell after is linked to an ongoing immune assault on olfactory nerve cells and an associated decline in the number of those cells. And so what's going on is basically people are continuously being attacked and those nerve cells are being killed, and that's why it extends much longer than other things. I lost my sense of smell a couple weeks ago, and it turned out it was the flu, though. And I got a sinus infection. I thought it was COVID, but it turned out there was influenza A. And but I lost my sense of smell. It was a very strange feeling, like nothing existed in the middle of my brain, which was very weird. And anyway, so there's some research into long COVID here and the loss of smell that a lot of people have experienced. And here is the Sciku that somehow comes from that this week. The Sciku is this. Missing Heartwood, the old oak still stands for something. Missing Heartwood, the old oak still stands for something. That is your Sciku for the week, and that is the show for this week. Thanks, everybody. It's been a great one. Next week's prompt is right here. I've wanted to do this prompt since the interview with James Pennebaker about expressive writing and how writing is healing because it reveals secrets that you haven't expressed, right? And that's why it allows you to sleep better at night and all sorts of things if you reveal, even if you don't share it. And it made me wonder what would happen if you shared it but used figurative language, and so you didn't actually share it literally in a way that anybody could understand, but you still got it out in a way that you understood. And so I was kind of curious about that since that interview last year. And so I meant to do this prompt and kind of forgot about it, then remembered again. This is write a poem about a secret, but use extended metaphor to keep it a secret. So that is your prompt for this week. Think of something that's a secret that you've never told anybody or told few people, but then don't get in trouble. Keep it a secret, but write about it in a way that nobody can tell what you're actually writing about. And we'll see what happens. That's the prompt for next week, the secret poem. Hope you participate. And if you don't want to, if it's too dangerous, feel free not to. But I don't want anybody incriminating themselves and doing hard time and in jail for something. But if you think that's fun, go ahead and do that prompt. Then next week's guest on the Rattlecast will be something a little different. Emily Ruth Hazel is a great poet and performer of poetry, too. I've had her at our live reading series back in the day. But instead of a book, she doesn't have any books of poetry. She has Wild Honey Words as the name of a business that does sort of poetry embroidered on things. And I thought it would be fascinating to talk to her about that, about different places we can use poetry, not just books and traditional publishing. I'm always curious about that. And so Emily Ruth Hazel has great poems she'll read too, but then we'll talk about Wild Words Honey and other things that she's doing to spread poetry in different places that we don't expect or usually see it. So it's going to be Rattlecast number 175, Emily Ruth Hazel and the Secrets Prompt, Monday, January 2nd, the usual time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific. It's going to be 2023 too, so be ready for that. Hope you have a great weekend. Hope you have a great rest of your 2022, and I will see you next week. Good night.